Every time you open Google Maps, you're using Nazi technology. Every time a rocket launches into space, you're watching Nazi engineering. Every time your phone knows which way is up, you're holding Nazi innovation. And America didn't just stumble upon this technology, America hunted for it, recruited the men who built it, protected them, gave them new identities, new lives, new purpose. And then, America lied about it for 30 years. This is the story of Operation Paperclip, the secret program that brought over 1,600 Nazi scientists to the United States after World War II. Scientists who designed Hitler's most advanced weapons, now building America's space program. Concentration camp supervisors, now receiving NASA's highest honors. SS officers now shaking hands with U.S. presidents. The world you live in today wouldn't exist without them. And what I'm about to tell you isn't conspiracy theory. It's declassified fact. A deal made in the shadows that changed history forever. So the question isn't whether this happened. The question is, was it worth it? Let's find out. May 2nd, 1945. Hitler is dead. Germany is collapsing. The war in Europe is almost over. And while the world prepares to celebrate victory, American intelligence officers are racing across Germany on a mission that has nothing to do with capturing territory. They're hunting for something far more valuable than gold or Nazi leaders. They're hunting for knowledge. And in a hidden underground facility carved into the Harz Mountains of central Germany, they find exactly what they're looking for. Blueprints, technical drawings, prototypes, research files, designs for weapons that are decades ahead of anything the Allies have ever seen. But here's what made American generals lose sleep that night. These weapons almost won Germany the war. Let me put this in perspective. In 1944, Germany launched the V-2 rocket. This thing could travel at 3,500 miles per hour. It could reach an altitude of 55 miles. That's space, by the way. It had a range of 200 miles, and it used a gyroscopic computer guidance system that nobody else in the world had figured out yet. Meanwhile, the best America had in 1944 could barely fly 5 miles high, traveled at 500 miles per hour, had a 30-mile range, and had no guidance system whatsoever. We weren't just behind. We were living in the past while Germany was building the future. Between 1944 and 1945, over 3,000 V-2 rockets hit London and Belgium. Each one traveled faster than the speed of sound. Victims on the ground heard nothing before impact. The explosion came first, the sound came second. There was no defense, no warning system, no way to shoot them down. And that was just one weapon. The Nazis also had operational jet fighters, the Messerschmitt 262, the first jet aircraft ever used in combat. While the Allies were flying propeller planes, Germany was flying jets that were 100 miles per hour faster than anything we had. They'd developed infrared night vision technology. They had guided missiles. They'd created synthetic fuel when their oil supplies ran out. They'd built nerve agents so deadly that even their own scientists were terrified to handle them. And they'd begun research into something even more disturbing: atomic weapons. If Germany had lasted just one more year, maybe even 6 more months, the entire outcome of the war might have been different. That reality hit American intelligence like a freight train, because suddenly the question wasn't, how did we win? The question was, how did we almost lose? And then came the second, even more terrifying question. Who else knows about this technology? The answer? The Soviet Union. And they were coming to take it. The race begins. See, when Germany collapsed, it didn't just surrender to one side. The country was carved up. The Americans took the West, the Soviets took the East. And right down the middle sat the greatest collection of scientific minds the world had ever seen. German scientists, engineers, mathematicians, weapons designers, rocket experts, chemists, physicists. Some of them were geniuses who just happened to be born in the wrong country at the wrong time. Others, war criminals. Men who'd supervised slave labor camps. men who'd conducted experiments on human beings, men who'd built machines of death and watched them kill thousands. But here's the thing about knowledge. It doesn't come with a conscience. A rocket doesn't care who designed it. An equation doesn't care who wrote it. Technology doesn't ask about morality. It just works. And both America and the Soviet Union knew that whoever got these scientists first would control the next 50 years of history. So in the spring of 1945, two new superpowers began a race. Not a race for territory, not a race for resources, a race for brains. The Cold War didn't start with missiles pointed at each other. It started with intelligence officers hunting through bombed-out German cities looking for men in lab coats. And among those ruins, the Americans found a man who would change everything. His name was Wernher von Braun, 33 years old, brilliant, charismatic, a rocket engineer since childhood. Von Braun had been obsessed with space travel since he was a teenager. He devoured science fiction. He taught himself physics and calculus. He built amateur rockets in fields outside Berlin. And when the Nazis came to power and started pouring money into weapons development, von Braun made a calculated decision. He'd build rockets for Hitler so he could one day build rockets to the stars. By the age of 27, he was the technical director of Germany's entire rocket program. He oversaw the development of the V-2. He ran a research facility with thousands of employees. He was one of the most important scientists in the Third Reich. He also wore an SS uniform. Now, von Braun would later claim, and some historians believe him, that he never cared about Nazi ideology, that he joined the SS only because it was required for his position, that he was a dreamer forced to work for a nightmare. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Whether he believed in the cause or not, he built the weapons. He knew where they were being used, and he knew how they were being built, because the V-2 rockets weren't just engineered in labs. They were manufactured in a concentration camp. Mittelbau Dora, a forced labor camp where 20,000 prisoners, Jews, political prisoners, Soviet POWs, worked in underground tunnels building V-2 rockets. They worked 16-hour shifts. They slept in tunnels with no sunlight, no fresh air, barely any food. They were beaten, starved, worked until they collapsed. More people died building V-2 rockets than were killed by them. Think about that for a second. The weapon itself killed about 3,000 people in London and Belgium. The production of that weapon killed over 20,000 in the camps. And Wernher von Braun visited that facility multiple times. He walked through those tunnels. He inspected the work. He knew what was happening. So when American soldiers found him in May 1945, they weren't just finding a genius. They were finding someone with blood on his hands. But they also knew something else. If they didn't take him, the Soviets would. And that changed everything. Picture this moment. You're an American intelligence officer in 1945. You've just defeated the most evil regime in modern history. Your friends died fighting Nazis. Your country sacrificed everything to stop them. And now you're standing in front of a man who worked for that regime, who built weapons for Hitler, who wore an SS uniform. But this man also has the knowledge to build rockets that can reach space, knowledge that could protect America, knowledge that could win the next war, the one everyone knows is coming with the Soviet Union. What do you do? Do you arrest him, put him on trial? Or do you shake his hand and bring him to America? The US government chose the handshake. And von Braun? He had already made his choice too. When Germany collapsed, he and his team specifically surrendered to the Americans, not the Soviets. He knew the Soviets would send him to Siberia. But America? America had resources, freedom, ambition. America would let him build rockets. On May 2nd, 1945, Wernher von Braun walked up to an American private and said in broken English, "My name is von Braun. I am the technical director of the German rocket program. I wish to surrender." That handshake in a German village became the birth of the American space program. But it also became America's darkest deal. The mission had a name: Operation Overcast. Later, when someone realized that name was a little too obvious, they changed it. Operation Paperclip. The name came from a literal paperclip. Intelligence officers would attach a paperclip to the files of German scientists they wanted to recruit. That clip meant approved for transfer to the United States. One small piece of metal that could erase a Nazi past and create an American future. The goal was ambitious: bring over 1,000 German scientists, engineers, and technicians to America before the Soviets grabbed them. But there was a massive problem. U.S. law, specifically President Truman's own directive, explicitly forbade bringing any Nazi Party members or active supporters of Nazism into the country. And nearly all these scientists were Nazi Party members. Some were SS officers, several had direct connections to war crimes. So the government did what governments do when the law conflicts with national interest. They changed the files. Imagine a filing cabinet in Washington, D.C., 1945. Inside are personnel files on German scientists. Real files, honest files. Files that list their Nazi Party membership numbers, their SS ranks, their positions in weapons programs, witness statements about their activities. Now imagine someone walking up to that cabinet with a black marker and a typewriter. Party membership? Cross it out. Type in no political affiliation. SS rank? Cross it out. Type in civilian contractor. Supervised slave labor? Cross it out. Type in research scientist with no administrative duties. That's not speculation. That actually happened. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, the group running Paperclip, systematically altered files, created false biographies, and buried evidence. When the FBI objected, they were told it was a matter of national security. When the State Department objected, they were overruled. Even President Truman didn't know the full extent of what was happening. Because the people running this operation understood something. If America hesitated, if America spent time debating ethics and morality and justice, the Soviets would win. And in 1945, that was unacceptable. September 1945. The first group of German scientists stepped off a ship in Boston Harbor. They weren't in chains, they weren't under arrest. They carried briefcases and suitcases. They wore civilian clothes. American military officers greeted them professionally. Some smiled nervously. Others looked around at American streets with relief. A few looked terrified, not of America, but of what they'd left behind and what might still catch up to them. They were driven to military bases across the country: Fort Bliss, Texas, White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. And slowly, quietly, their families joined them. German wives pushing shopping carts in American grocery stores. German children playing baseball in Texas. German accents at PTA meetings. They celebrated the 4th of July. They went to church on Sundays. They mowed lawns and waved at neighbors. And their neighbors had no idea who they were. No idea that the friendly engineer down the street used to work on rockets that killed Allied soldiers. No idea that the professor at the local university once held an SS rank. No idea that the man coaching Little League once supervised production at a forced labor camp. This wasn't a small program. This was a complete transplant of Germany's scientific infrastructure into American soil. Over 1,600 scientists eventually came through Paperclip, and they didn't just come to work. They came to stay. They became American citizens. They raised American children. They bought houses with white picket fences. And they went to work building America's future. Not everyone in the American government was okay with this. The FBI hated it. Director J. Edgar Hoover repeatedly sent memos warning that Nazi scientists posed a security risk and a moral problem. The State Department fought back, arguing that Paperclip violated international law and American values. Even some military officials were uncomfortable. Officers who'd fought in Europe now had to work alongside men who designed the weapons that killed their friends. But every objection was crushed by a simple argument: if we don't take them, Stalin will. And that argument worked every single time. Because while America was debating, the Soviets were acting. October 22nd, 1946. In the middle of the night, Soviet soldiers surrounded research facilities across East Germany. They knocked on doors, they ordered scientists and their families to pack immediately, they loaded them onto trains. Destination? The Soviet Union. This was Operation Paperclip, the Soviet version of Paperclip. In one night, the Soviets grabbed over 2,200 German specialists, scientists, engineers, technicians. Some went willingly. Many didn't. Some were given no choice. Soldiers showed up with guns and their families disappeared into the Russian interior. The Soviets weren't concerned with Nazi backgrounds. They didn't care about war crimes. They didn't bother with paperwork or false biographies. They just took the talent. And they put these German scientists to work building Soviet missiles, Soviet jets, Soviet weapons. This was the Cold War in its purest form. Two superpowers, desperate for advantage, grabbing pieces of a broken empire and weaponizing them against each other. And in that race, morality came second. Survival came first. So when American officials defended Paperclip, they'd point to the Soviets and say, "Look what they're doing. If we don't do the same, we lose." And slowly, reluctantly, the objections quieted. Because deep down, everyone understood the reality. The war had ended, but the peace was just another kind of war. A war where knowledge was the ammunition, and America was determined not to run out. The work begins. White Sands Missile Range, New Mexico, 1946. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction. Heat shimmered off the sand. Nothing but scrubland and sky. And in the middle of nowhere, German engineers and American soldiers built rocket test stands. It wasn't smooth at first. Language barriers made communication difficult. Cultural differences created tension. And there was always this unspoken discomfort. Former enemies now working side by side. But rockets don't care about politics. Either they fly, or they don't. The first tests were failures. Rockets exploded on the pad, engines misfired, guidance systems failed. Each explosion taught them something. Each failure brought them closer to success. And slowly, the American engineers started to learn. They watched how the Germans calculated thrust ratios. They studied guidance system designs. They absorbed decades of knowledge in months. Von Braun led the effort. He stood in the desert sun, pointing at blueprints, shouting over engine roars, sketching designs on chalkboards that would later become missiles defending America. And the uncomfortable truth was this: it worked. The rockets flew higher, the missiles flew farther. The technology advanced faster than anyone had imagined. By the early 1950s, America had a missile program that rivaled anything the Soviets had. And every success meant the same thing. Paperclip was working. The deal was paying off. Here's where the story gets really interesting. Because these scientists didn't just work in the shadows, they rose. Werner Braun went from Nazi engineer to American hero. In the 1950s, he appeared on television with Walt Disney explaining space travel to American children. In 1960, he became the first director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. In 1969, he stood in mission control, watching the Saturn V rocket, his design, carry Apollo 11 to the moon. He shook hands with presidents, he received medals. His face appeared on magazine covers. And the American public loved him. Because by then, most people didn't know about his past. The records were sealed, the files were classified. The paperclips had done their job. Von Braun became the face of American innovation, the genius who made the space age possible. The former Nazi was now an American icon. And he wasn't alone. Arthur Rudolph, who directly supervised slave labor at Mittelbau-Dora, became the project director for the Saturn V rocket. NASA gave him its Distinguished Service Medal. Herbert Struchold, accused of conducting medical experiments in concentration camps, became known as the father of space medicine. Buildings and awards were named after him. Kurt Debus, who wore his SS uniform to work at the V2 facility, became the first director of NASA's Kennedy Space Center. These weren't low-level technicians hiding in the background. These were leaders, decision-makers, men who shaped America's space program from top to bottom. And for decades, almost nobody knew the truth about where they came from. October 4th, 1957. Americans went to bed thinking they were safe, thinking they were ahead, thinking the Cold War was something distant and manageable. Then they woke up to a sound from space. Beep, beep, beep. Sputnik. A Soviet satellite, orbiting Earth, broadcasting a radio signal that anyone with the right equipment could hear. It was just a metal sphere, 84 kilograms, no bigger than a beach ball. But that beep represented something terrifying. The Soviets had beaten America to space, and if they could put a satellite in orbit there, they could put a nuclear warhead there too. The American public freaked out. Newspapers ran headlines about Soviet superiority. Politicians gave speeches about falling behind. Parents looked up at the night sky and felt fear instead of wonder. Kids in schools were taught to hide under desks in case of nuclear attack. The Soviets were above us, literally. And suddenly, the Nazi scientists America had quietly tucked away in labs and test ranges became the country's emergency plan. Werner Braun was pulled from the shadows. The government that had hidden his past now needed him front and center, because America needed someone who could catch up to the Soviets, fast. January 31st, 1958. Just 4 months after Sputnik, America launched Explorer 1, the rocket that carried it, designed by Werner Braun's team. It worked. America was back in the space race. And von Braun wasn't a secret anymore. He was a hero, a savior, the man who could beat the Soviets. Television cameras followed him. Reporters interviewed him. He became the public face of American space ambition. And every time he appeared on TV, smiling and confident, explaining how America would reach the moon, nobody mentioned what he used to be. They only talked about what he could do. But the Soviets weren't done. April 12, 1961. Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. The Soviets had done it again. America was still playing catch-up. And that's when President John F. Kennedy made the boldest promise in modern history. May 25, 1961. Kennedy stood before Congress and said, "I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth." The moon, in less than 9 years. It seemed impossible. But von Braun heard that speech and thought, "I can do this." And NASA gave him everything he needed. The Saturn V rocket is still the most powerful machine ever built by humans. Standing 363 feet tall, taller than the Statue of Liberty, weighing 6,500 tons fully fueled, producing 76 million horsepower at liftoff. It's the rocket that carried every Apollo mission to the moon. And it was designed by Werner Braun. The same man who designed the V2. The same man who wore his SS uniform. The same man who visited concentration camps and kept building rockets anyway. Now he was building the machine that would represent humanity's greatest achievement. Think about that paradox for a second. The rocket that carried the American flag to the moon, the ultimate symbol of American triumph, was designed by a former Nazi. The technology that killed thousands in London during World War II evolved into the technology that took humanity to another world. Progress and horror, innovation and compromise, all wrapped up into one machine. July 20th, 1969. 600 million people watched on television. Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin. The lunar module touched down. Armstrong's voice crackled through static. The Eagle has landed. And then, hours later, that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. The entire world celebrated. America had done it. We'd reached the moon. We'd beaten the Soviets. It was triumph. Pure, beautiful, historic triumph. And in Mission Control, Wernher von Braun watched the moment his life's dream came true. He'd spent his whole life obsessed with reaching space. As a teenager in Germany, he'd built amateur rockets. As a young man, he'd worked for the Nazis because they'd fund his research. As an older man, he'd worked for America because America gave him the resources to finally do it. And now, because of him, because of his rocket, humans were walking on the moon. The celebration was genuine. The achievement was real. But underneath it all was a truth America wasn't ready to say out loud. We reached the moon on Nazi technology. We won the space race with Nazi engineers. We planted the American flag on lunar soil using knowledge that came from one of the darkest regimes in history. That doesn't erase the achievement, but it complicates it. By the 1970s and 1980s, Operation Paperclip had accomplished its mission. America had the most advanced space program on Earth, superior missile technology, satellite systems that gave military advantage, aerospace engineering that dominated the world. The scientists brought through Paperclip didn't just contribute, they built the foundation. GPS technology, developed from German guidance systems. Ballistic missiles, German rocket science. Satellite technology, German innovations adapted and improved. Modern aerospace engineering, taught by German professors at American universities. Medical research on human endurance in extreme conditions, German data, some of it gathered in horrifying ways. The world you live in today, the technology you use every single day, has fingerprints on it from Operation Paperclip. Your phone's accelerometer? That technology traces back to German gyroscope research. Weather satellites? German rocket technology made them possible. Intercontinental ballistic missiles that kept the peace during the Cold War? German designs, improved by German engineers working in America. Even the International Space Station, humanity's greatest cooperative achievement in space, wouldn't exist without the foundation laid by Paperclip scientists. So here's the question that haunts this story. Was it worth it? The truth doesn't stay buried forever. Through the 1970s and 1980s, documents started getting declassified. Journalists started digging. Historians started connecting dots. And slowly, the American public learned about Operation Paperclip. The reaction was complicated. 1984. Arthur Rudolph, former production manager at Mittelbau-Dora, later project director for the Saturn V rocket, was under investigation. Evidence had surfaced. Testimony from survivors. Documents showing he'd directly supervised slave labor, that he'd been present when prisoners were beaten, that he knew prisoners were dying and continued the work anyway. The U.S. government gave him a choice: face trial or leave the country. He fled to Germany. NASA quietly removed his name from awards. His medals were returned. His legacy was erased from official histories. But he'd already lived 40 years in America as a celebrated scientist. He'd already helped put men on the moon. He'd already received honors and respect and a comfortable life. Justice came late, if it came at all. And Rudolph wasn't alone. Through the 1980s and 1990s, investigators identified over 130 Paperclip scientists with questionable backgrounds. Some of their citizenship was revoked. Some were deported. Some died before they could face any consequences. Many others lived their entire lives in America, died peacefully, and were buried with honor. The truth came out, but it came out slowly, quietly, without the dramatic trials or public reckonings you might expect. When Americans learned about Paperclip, opinions split. Some people were outraged. They said, "We defeated Nazism and then hired Nazis? We fought for justice and then gave war criminals new identities. We claim moral leadership while protecting people who should have been in prison?" Others defended it. They said, "This was necessary. The Soviets were doing the same thing. Worse, actually. If we hadn't taken these scientists, we'd lose the Cold War. We'd lose the space race. The world would look very different today, and not in a good way." Both arguments have truth to them. That's what makes this story so uncomfortable. Because this isn't a clear case of right from wrong. It's a case of competing priorities: survival versus justice, national security versus moral clarity. And history doesn't give easy answers to questions like that. Let's be honest about what Paperclip cost. It cost moral authority. How can America lecture other nations about human rights when we protected people who violated them? It cost justice. Victims of Nazi atrocities watched their tormentors live comfortably in America, celebrated as heroes. It set a precedent. If you're useful enough, your past can be erased. Genius can excuse crimes. Knowledge can buy forgiveness. That precedent echoes today. But let's also be honest about what Paperclip gained. It gained technological supremacy. America became the world's leading aerospace power. It gained military advantage. Soviet expansion was checked by American missile superiority. It gained the space program, the moon landing, the shuttle, the space station, satellites that connect the world. It gained 50 years of innovation that shaped modern life. So what's the verdict? There isn't one. Because history doesn't hand out verdicts. It hands out consequences, and we're still living with them. Here's why this story matters today. Because the choice America faced in 1945 hasn't gone away. Right now, there's a global competition for artificial intelligence talent. Chinese scientists working on surveillance technology, Russian programmers with cyber warfare expertise, Iranian nuclear researchers. If one of them wanted to defect, if they had knowledge that could give America a strategic advantage, would we take them? Would we care about their past work? Would we investigate what they built for authoritarian regimes? Or would we give them a visa, a lab, and a fresh start? The Paperclip question isn't historical. It's current, because nations still face the same choice. Do you prioritize moral purity, or do you prioritize winning? And history suggests that when those two things conflict, winning comes first. That's not a defense. It's just reality. Superpowers don't stay super by always choosing the high road. They stay super by making hard choices, uncomfortable choices, choices they'd rather not talk about later. Operation Paperclip was one of those choices. It wasn't noble. It wasn't inspiring. It wasn't the kind of story that makes you proud. But it worked. America won the Cold War. We reached the moon. We became the dominant technological power on Earth. And part of that success, not all of it, but part of it, came from knowledge we borrowed from people we defeated. That's the truth. You can be angry about it, you can defend it, you can see it as pragmatic or immoral, or both, but you can't deny it shaped the world we live in. So where does this leave us? What do we do with a story like this? Because Operation Paperclip doesn't fit neatly into the narratives we tell about America. It's not a story about good guys defeating bad guys. It's not a story about justice prevailing. It's not even a story about redemption. It's a story about power, about fear, about nations making choices in the dark and hoping history forgives them. Let's acknowledge what came from Paperclip. The moon landing happened because of Wernher von Braun. That's not opinion, that's documented fact. Without his Saturn V rocket, Apollo doesn't happen. NASA's entire trajectory changed because of German rocket scientists. The foundation of American space exploration was built by men who started their careers in Nazi Germany. Modern missile defense exists because of paperclip engineers. The systems that prevented nuclear war during the Cold War trace back to German guidance technology. Satellite communication, weather forecasting, GPS navigation, medical research on space travel, materials science, propulsion technology. All of it connected to Operation Paperclip. The world didn't just change because of what these scientists built. The world exists in its current form partially because America made the choice to bring them here. But let's also acknowledge what it cost. It cost innocence. America learned it could compromise its values when threatened. It cost trust. Victims of Nazi atrocities watched America protect their tormentors. It cost moral clarity. How do you reconcile never again with hiring the people who made it happen? And it set a precedent that still haunts us, that expertise can erase guilt, that usefulness matters more than history, that nations will do whatever it takes to stay on top. That precedent didn't die with the Cold War. It's alive today. Here's the thing about progress. It doesn't care where it comes from. Technology has no morality. Knowledge has no conscience. The same physics that describes a rocket reaching the moon also describes a missile carrying a warhead. The same engineering that builds satellites also builds weapons. The same minds that create can also destroy. And nations have to decide, do we reject knowledge because of its source, or do we use it and accept the moral weight that comes with it? America chose the second option. And every GPS signal, every satellite image, every rocket launch carries that choice forward. So here's what I want you to think about. Imagine you're in charge. It's 1945. The Soviets are rising. Your former ally is becoming your enemy, and you have the chance to bring the world's greatest rocket scientists to America. They're brilliant. They're experienced. They can help you win the next war before it starts. But they also work for Hitler. Some of them did terrible things. Do you bring them in? Do you prioritize security over justice? Do you choose winning over moral purity? It's easy to judge from here, from 2025, knowing how it all turned out. But in 1945, nobody knew if the Cold War would stay cold. Nobody knew if nuclear weapons would destroy civilization. Nobody knew if the Soviets would dominate the world. They just knew they were afraid. And fear makes people do things they wouldn't normally do. Operation Paperclip isn't a story about right or wrong. It's a story about what nations will do to survive. It's a story about the gap between ideals and reality. It's a story about how power works when nobody's watching. And the uncomfortable truth is this: America didn't defeat evil and walk away clean. America defeated evil, then borrowed parts of it to fight the next threat. That's not heroic, but it might have been necessary. That's not just, but it might have been smart. That's not pure, but it was effective. And in the end, effectiveness won. The rockets flew, the satellites orbited, the flag planted on the moon. America became the world's superpower. And beneath all that achievement sits a secret we kept for 30 years. We didn't do it alone. We did it with help from people we wish had never existed. But they did exist, and we used them. So the next time you use Google Maps to find your way home, remember, a Nazi scientist helped invent the technology that makes it possible. The next time you watch a rocket launch and feel that sense of wonder, remember, the foundation of that program was built by men who once served Hitler. The next time you look up at the International Space Station passing overhead, remember, it exists because America made a deal in the shadows 75 years ago. A deal that changed history. A deal that built the modern world. A deal we're still trying to understand. Operation Paperclip wasn't America's proudest moment, but it might have been one of its most important because it taught us something we still haven't fully processed. Greatness isn't pure, power isn't clean, Progress isn't innocent. And sometimes the price of tomorrow is forgiving yesterday. Whether that trade was worth it? I'll let you decide. What do you think? Was Operation Paperclip justified? Would you have made the same choice? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories about the hidden history that shaped our world, hit that subscribe button. Because history isn't what they taught you in school, it's what they didn't want you to know. Thanks for watching.